And this weekend, I was poking around Twitter and retweeted a graph that was showing, how ever since Reagan, tuition rates have just gone through the roof. And Will Bunch commented on it, and it's been a while since Will's been on the program. He's the national opinion columnist with the Philadelphia Inquirer, the author of several absolutely brilliant books. This guy really just does brilliant work, and I think probably one of the most important of his books. Tear down this myth, the right-wing distortion of Reagan. And now he has got a new book out called After the Ivory Tower Falls, apropos of our conversation about student loan rates and things like that. Excuse me, the website inquirer.com/bunch and Twitter Will_Bunch. Do I have all that right, Will?
Yeah, sounds good, Tom.
Okay, great. Welcome back to the program. It's been too long. Tell me about your new book, After the Ivory Tower Falls.
Yes. So, something remarkable has really happened over the course of our lifetimes, right? And you and I have both seen this happen, Tom, and that is college has become the real fault line in American politics. And, you see it every election now where more and more the Democratic Party is getting votes from people with college diplomas. And more the Republican pitch is tailored around a white working class without college degrees.
Right.
And this MAGA Republican movement that we're talking about right now, the steady rise of this movement has really been fueled by resentment. And I really started thinking about this book 15 years ago because I was trying to understand the resentment on the right and where it was coming from, and how come conservatives didn't resent the CEOs who were shutting down these factory towns, who were outsourcing jobs to Mexico or to China. The people they resented were people in the media, journalists, Hollywood movie stars, and college professors. There was just so much scorn. I spent a lot of time listening to right wing talk radio to see where they were coming from, and where they were coming from was a real disdain towards college, and it's become a real disdain towards learning, education.
Was it Reagan who used to call them pointy-headed liberals, or was that George Herbert Walker Bush?
Well, remember Spiro T. Agnew, the vice president?
That's right.
He was the one who started talking about effete snobs and pointy-headed liberals and
nattering nabobs of negativism.
Journalists were nattering nabobs of negativism, and that's where you see the roots of this resentment towards education. And it's interesting because it started in college, and what you've been seeing really in the last 2 years since the George Floyd protests is now it's even directed more at K through 12, where this whole thing about alleged critical race theory teaching in schools, and it's really a gathering effort to destroy public education. And right. We have a Republican Party that's afraid of critical thinking, afraid of people going to college where they tend to learn to embrace things like tolerance and diversity, which they see as their enemy.
So I can understand a political strategy where you want to reach out to people, and if resentment is the main thing you have to sell because you're not really offering anybody anything. You didn't get a college education, you're not making as much money as the lawyer down the street, so you should feel pissed off at him. I can get the political strategy of kind of playing to that kind of grievance, but that seems like a very short-term thing, number one. And number two, it doesn't, I don't see any political rationalization for it. I mean, how do you explain that as policy? What is in it for Republicans outside of wanting to, just the old libertarian thing of every public service that's being provided by government should be provided by an individual who can make a buck off it? I mean, is that the bottom line here? This is this entire process of trying to destroy public education, starting with colleges and now going after primary education, that really what they're trying to do is, make America safe for charter schools?
That's a piece of it, but I think that's kind of the end game. I think where it all starts, this idea of whether higher education should be a public good. In my book, what I try and do is, I basically chronicle maybe 2.5 distinct periods. And the first period is the golden age of college, and this starts with the GI Bill, with when they had this idea to see what would happen if they gave returning veterans a free ride, and it turned out, they were great students. They loved the opportunity to learn and get an opportunity to work with their minds, as opposed to going into a factory or going to work on a farm. And they wanted that for their children. And Republicans and Democrats alike supported the idea of higher education. They supported science and research. And you saw college enrollment grow sixfold, from 1945 to 1960. And the reason why is tuition was incredibly low. In some places, most famously the University of California, which we need to talk about, it was free up until the time of Reagan. Yeah. Right. Well, and there was also this ethos around college that liberal education would make the world a better place, that you would have a better educated citizenry, because America had just been through the Great Depression. It had just been through 2 world wars. There were concerns about, how fascism had risen in Europe and totalitarianism. And, education was seen as a way to advance democracy. Mm-hmm. And it kind of was. You had a flourishing of people studying the humanities and the social sciences in the 50s, 60s, into the 70s. The thing is, they took these critical thinking skills, these young people, and they turned it on America's own hypocrisy, right? They turned it on racial segregation in the South initially, and then when the Vietnam War came along, they turned it against that and American imperialism overseas. And you had a backlash. And as you know, Tom, the avatar of that backlash was our old friend, Ronald Reagan.
Right. So you're arguing that part of the impetus for the Republican war on public education, broadly, is that educated people make smarter citizens, and smarter citizens tend not to vote for Republicans? I mean, does it really boil down to something that simple?
You think, that's too simplistic, or that couldn't be. But, when you look into history, there's a fascinating, I'm embarrassed to say it's actually, this isn't in the hardcover version of my book. It's going to be in the paperback, because I just learned about it right as the book was being published. But in 1970, a man named Roger Freeman, who was a advisor on higher ed issues to Ronald Reagan and also to Nixon, who was president at the time, gave a presentation. It was published in the San Francisco Chronicle, and he said, "An educated proletariat? We can't have that. That's dynamite. We can't have that." He goes, he said, "There are some people. College is not for everybody. There's some people who shouldn't be going to college." And I don't know how familiar you are. You probably are familiar with the economist James McGill Buchanan.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with him. I mean, Nancy MacLean wrote a whole book about him, which is largely how I've been informed. But
myself too. The Nancy MacLean book,
Democracy in Chains.
Chains is fantastic.
Yeah. By the way, we're talking with Will Bunch. He's got a new book out, After the Ivory Tower Falls. So yeah, keep going, Will.
Yeah, I was going to say, Buchanan, who was a thought leader on the right, wrote a book called Academia and Anarchy, and he basically said that free tuition or low tuition encourages kids to become revolutionaries, and we need to have capitalism kind of take control of this and make college a more privatized venture where, we're the investors and the students are the product, And,
it's kind of a variation on the prediction that Russell Kirk made in 1951 in his book, The Conservative Mind, where he argued that if the American middle class continued to grow in wealth, and he didn't specifically identify education, but I would say that that's the secondary consequence of it, that if it continued to grow in wealth, and at the rate that it had been since the end of World War II, that eventually we would reach a point where women would no longer know their place, minorities would no longer know their place, young people would rebel, and society would begin to disintegrate. Oh, and not just racial minorities, but gender minorities as well. And so, and everybody laughed at him in the early 50s, except for, a few intellectuals like William F. Buckley, and Barry Goldwater. But when the late 60s came along and everybody was, free love and smoked dope and then, 72, 73, legalizing birth control and abortion, a lot of conservatives went back and started rereading Russell Kirk and going, holy cow, this guy was right. We've got to crush the middle class. And that was, part of Reagan's strategy for destroying unions.
Yeah, and exactly. Well, unions, of course, but also college,
Right, because the unions could you could pay for college. You could send your kids to college if you had a good union job.
Yeah, I mean, you needed college graduates. You needed a knowledge economy. But what happened in the 1970s, this Act Two I'm talking about here,
right,
is the privatization of higher ed.
Yep.
So tuition started to rise. The government, very consciously under Reagan, went away from any thought of Well, first of all, two things happened. I mean, on the state level, taxpayer support for public universities has plummeted. My home state, Pennsylvania, is one of the worst, but it used to be 75% of the cost of our public university system just came from tax dollars. Now it's only 25%, and the rest is made up with tuition. And this is true in states all across the country. In the meantime, you had the government getting away from Pell Grants and direct aid, which used to heavily subsidize the cost of a person's education. Now it only pays a fraction, and the difference had to be made up with loans. And you went from a very low amount of college loans in the 60s and 70s to this $1.75 trillion mountain, this behemoth that we
which
ended
is
up,
nuts.
Yeah,
it's crippling America. Well, I'm sorry, we've got to wrap it up here. There's a hard break here. I can't stop. I can go on.
There's a lot here.
There really is, and we could go on for quite a while.
Well, you can read the book and
there you
learn
go.
a lot more about
the book is After the Ivory Tower Falls. The author is Will Bunch, Will_Bunch over on Twitter, Inquirer.com/Bunch online. Will, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me back. It's great to talk to you again. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Will Bunch, one of the really brilliant authors out there. We'll be right back. 18 minutes past the hour.